swing and a drive, left field. It's deep. It's gone. Yes! And it is gone. Yes! It is bedlam at the bank. Look at the doctor. Yes, he's got it. Here he comes. Way back to me. It is Cleveland slam dunk. And the doctor made a sensational play. Hunter in front. The front to they score! And Giroux got it. Busted. Fires. Blasted goal! Brady back again. He steps up his head and falls forward. And he fumbles the football and the able have it.
We welcome you to the Philly Sports Hour here on Philly Sports Sports. It's been a while since we've had one of these, but we have a lot to talk about with the team that plays with the orange ball and wears red, white, and blue. The Philadelphia 76ers free agency in the offseason is underway, and it's been one heck of a week for the Sixers. And to help talk about that, welcome into the show, Zach Ciavolella of the Philly Sports Network. Zach, an eventful morning with the Sixers, but it's been an eventful week.
Yeah, really, since free agency started and even the rumblings beforehand, it's kind of been nonstop for Philadelphia, which I would certainly assume Sixers fans are pretty happy with. So not a bad week for Daryl Morey and company.
No, not a bad week at all. And let's just get started right now as, well, the elephant in the room is the guy coming in from the Los Angeles Clippers, signing a 4-year, $212 max deal in Paul George. 22.6 points per game, 5.2 rebounds, 3.5 assists, 47.1% from the field. There's different ways you can look at the Paul George deal. He's 34 years old. He's declining. Max deal for a guy's going to be 38 at the end of the deal. How are you looking at this Paul George signing, the pros and cons of it? Because I'm looking at it in so many different ways.
Yeah, and I think that you're right to kind of look at it through different lenses. There, simply put, was no perfect offseason move. And I, for one, think that the signing of Paul George was likely the best case scenario of the realistic options. But even that being said, it's not as if it doesn't have its potentials to disappoint. Obviously, age is a factor, but that being said, Paul George's game is set to age relatively well. He's already no longer the defender that he was at his peak. I think that we can kind of take that out of the equation, but even still, he's a plus defender. It's not as if he is what Philadelphia has seen on the wings in years past. So, it's not the worst case scenario by far. I know there were some people who were kind of, I don't want my team to sign Paul George, this, that, the other thing before the signing happened. But, when you really look at it, you're getting a 20-plus per game scorer, a guy who fits perfectly between Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, is truly a 3-and-D player, and a guy who's really just going to launch it from deep at that, a real volume target. So I do think that Paul George, considering the options, is as perfect a fit as there was available.
Yeah, you mentioned the perfect fit. Just how does he fit in this lineup with Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, now these other guys that the Sixers are starting to sign in that starting five? How perfect are you seeing this fit?
I would say it's pretty much ideal. You're getting a guy who doesn't have to be ball dominant. He last year playing alongside James Harden, as players tend to do alongside James Harden, played a lot off ball. And Harden, to Harden's credit, set him up for plenty of fantastic open looks. Hopefully you see Tyrese Maxey improve, take a bit of a step forward as a true point guard this season to be able to set him up for somewhat similar type of shots. But additionally, you have that attention getter in the post and Joel Embiid to really kind of open up the floor for Paul George. And then on top of that, I think there's a little bit of an expectation for George to kind of create his own offense and carry the Sixers offense at times where Joel Embiid's not on the court. Maybe Tyrese Maxey isn't on the court either. But this gives Philadelphia some nice optionality where last season there were some times where they had both Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid off the court, and they were not good. So now you factor in a third, say top 30 player in the league into that equation. Well, that gives you a lot more optionality on when to rest guys, really line up fluidity and everything such as that. So I think Nick Nurse is actually going to have a fun time kind of setting up these lineups throughout the season, because Paul George is a guy versatile enough that you can kind of, put him here, put him there, put him everywhere in a sense.
I want to run through the pros and cons of Paul George. We kind of did that a little bit earlier, but a little more nosedive into it. We'll start with the positives, because we like to keep things positive in Philadelphia. Philadelphia sports fans, we are very positive about everything that is done. The positive of the Paul George signing, it seems like you're more on the positive side. I'm more on the negative side. What do you have?
Interesting. Yeah, so I mean, for the positive side for me, I think I've kind of laid it out in terms of fit, in terms of scoring ability. Again, as I said, there are admitted negative sides to this. The fact that he's missed several games in the past. Several. He's missed quite a few. So I pair that with Joel Embiid, and that's obviously a concern. He is not, in fact, getting younger. So again, that is a concern, especially when you combine that with the games missed. There is something to be said about Paul George's playoff performance. Now, it is not as bad as some people have made it out to be. He's more so the victim of his own nicknaming, where he called himself Playoff P and then underperformed in the playoffs thereafter. So, in that kind of primary, secondary option role on a postseason contender, maybe that doesn't work for Paul George. But in Philadelphia, he's going to be that third option, that tertiary option. So, that's where the positivity comes back in. But I do think that there is a very tangible, I have to see it to truly believe it when it comes to the playoffs for not even just Paul George, but really up until this past season, there were questions around Joel Embiid. So seeing him perform again in the playoffs like he did last year, hopefully healthy this time, there's questions for a litany of different players on this team come the playoffs. But Paul George is certainly not exempt from that.
Yeah, my expectations with Paul George from the name he gives himself is high. Playoff P. If we're calling ourselves Playoff P and underperforming in the playoffs in Philadelphia,
yeah, it's not going to go well.
We might have some issues. But my thing is, I can't give, what was the contract, 4 years? I can't give $212 million to a guy who is declining, 34 years old. I understand. I knew this is what they were going to do. We had the article pre-written on Philly Sports. I knew that they were going to go and get Paul George, especially when the Clippers were out. And it was probably, as you said, the move that makes the most sense. But it makes sense. But he's still 34 years old, declining. Yeah. $212 million. Like, I understand they were going to do it, and I hope it works out, obviously. In 2 years, where he's 36 years old, averaging 15, 14 points a game at the pace he's going, you're going to be paying this guy however much money he's making a year. Would you rather is there a way you would rather do it? But I don't
know that the drop off is that steep. I don't know if the drop off is that steep, just because, again, with him as a primarily off ball shooter, I think it will age somewhat more gracefully. Again, it's the things defensively. That's what you're going to see kind of go from the wayside. He's already kind of an engaged defender on his terms, which is a bit problematic. He needs to motivate himself better, I feel, in order to remain competitively defensively. But you're going to be able to see that athleticism fall off. You're going to see that defensive ability fall off. Probably some driving abilities going to fall down by the wayside as he gets older. At least as a shooter, I think that we're going to be seeing somewhat of a decent carryover from year to year. Really, this is, and we can talk for days, honestly, about the moves, the many, many moves that led to the Sixers eventually landing Paul George, even going so far as not trading Ben Simmons before there was a problem between Simmons and Philadelphia. I mean, that's how long this has been on, effectively a crash collision course to this plan of signing a free agent into cap space. But really, all that considered, at the end of the day, you are bringing in a guy who is a relatively seamless fit. Yeah, it's absolutely a lot of money. I think that is a legitimate concern that you're going to have, because year 4 of this deal is probably not going to be the prettiest, and there's probably going to be some flashbacks to players of years past, not naming names, that Philadelphia is considered overpaid. But even still, with that being considered, people have been saying for the past 5-ish years that Joel Embiid's window is the next 2 years. So even if Paul George is highly competitive for those next 2 years, there is a solid shot of the Sixers at least contending in the Eastern Conference. And again, one of the most important factors of this and all of their other offseason moves so far, Philadelphia still has all of their draft assets, including Jared McCain, who they selected with the 16th pick. So there's quite a bit in the war chest to be able to make future moves in addition to those that they have already. So combining all of those factors together, I don't think you can say anyone at this point in time can without a doubt compete with the Celtics, considering how they played last year. But I think Philadelphia is shaping up as good as any Eastern Conference contender right now.
I also have the Sixers tag with anything that, or whatever they do, usually doesn't work. So, I mean, I always will have that tag with the Sixers. But hopefully this goes different. Another thing, you mentioned how long this plan has been in place. The plan to sign Paul George, 34 years old, to a 4-year, $212 million contract, shaping that up over the process almost, the past 5 years. If that's the plan we're going with, I'm almost jumping off the ship if we're sailing, to the Paul George Island. Like, that's not the plan I would love if that is what we were trying to do for the past 5 years, and try and win a championship in there. But if we're still looking at this, I don't love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look back, even during the process days, part of the concept the entire time was, obviously, you tank, you accrue draft assets, you draft high level talent, and then you add stars through free agency or the trade market, right? So it's effectively not an unfamiliar concept. Philadelphia has been trying to nail down that latter portion of that plan since the process began. Now, it looked like for a time that they had it accomplished in Jimmy Butler. Then they went ahead and let him walk to Miami the following season. I think we can probably all agree that at least the way that they did it was not a positive, was not the right move to make. So now you go through kind of a series of blunders, whether it is extending to Tobias Harris, whether it is signing Al Horford, this, that, the other thing, just for years through many different ownership, not ownership groups, but many different front office groups, I should say. So this isn't a Sam Hinkie thing. This isn't a Daryl Morey thing. This is something that's been a consistent lack of success, I will say, throughout that entire time. And there have been very big blockades. So not only are you not succeeding, but there are now blockades in your place, such as the Al Horford contract, the Ben Simmons contract, the Tobias Harris contract. Well, now in an offseason where you don't have any of that, I mean, yeah, maybe you'd say that ideally, if you are planning to sign a guy who is a top 30 talent outright in free agency, in an ideal situation, maybe he's not 34. I think that's not outrageous to say. That being considered, you have to look at the realistic options that were ahead of them. It seems nobody's in a rush to trade for Brandon Ingram. Donovan Mitchell re-signed in Cleveland. LeBron James is still in LA. And, you kind of look around the room. Well, I mean, who else is there really except for Paul George? And again, the fact that you're able to acquire him without giving up that draft compensation, that's what makes the significant difference here. I know there's people who still are pounding the table for a guy like Lauri Markkanen. There's no guarantee that Danny Ainge in Utah is actually going to trade him. There's going to be probably some more rumors picking up between now and around August, mid-August, when Lauri Markkanen's extension eligible. But until then, there's no guarantee that he's going to be on the move. And if he is, it's going to take the entire war chest. So, to be able to land a guy who can produce like Paul George, I get it. It's a lot of money. It's a big concern. I mean, it's not my money, so I'm not overly concerned about it. Year 3 and 4 are going to be iffy to probably not very good. But again, to still have those assets, that's what makes it a true win to me, is that you got a player of that caliber, player of that name, and I think a guy who's already contributed to some extra free agents coming. I mean, Caleb Martin, who I'm sure we're going to talk about at some point. I'm not saying because Paul George followed him on Instagram, that's why Caleb Martin decided to come to Philadelphia. But I do think that it is a factor that you have a star who, granted, and this is the same thing that we talked about with Bryce Harper when he came to Philadelphia. Yes, he was offered the most money and most years by Philadelphia, but still came to this city regardless. And I think when you see a star, a well-regarded player do that, I think that does make moves for your team, as we've seen with Bryce Harper in the Phillies. So now I think we're starting to see with Paul George and the Philadelphia 76ers.
And it's a star who's choosing Philadelphia.
Exactly.
Like the Bryce Harper thing. Who in the world would want to come to Philadelphia over Los Angeles, San Francisco, or whoever else he was looking at, New York at the time? And now it's Paul George picking Philadelphia over Los Angeles again. A fancy new stadium, a fancy new arena he could play in, James Harden, these new uniforms that they, for some reason, announced in the middle of the season last year, which made no sense. But no, he chose Philadelphia, who plays in the Wells Fargo Center. And they have Joel Embiid. They have a young rising star in Tyrese Maxey. They have Joel Embiid. But he chose that over. He chose that problem, which, is always an issue in Philadelphia, the Sixers, over the Clippers. And that says something about the front office and the team, who people in charge. He chose that over a shiny new arena in Los Angeles and Los Angeles in general. And that was part of the report. Bringing him in would bring in other free agents and guys would want to come play with Paul George. You saw that with Harper, as we said. And who knows? Maybe him following people on Instagram is it's a hit. I'm waiting for my follow from Paul George.
Yeah, you and me both.
The new arena in LA, you can see Paul George playing Philadelphia, and you can do all of that with SeatGeek. That's another great. I am on fire with some of these transitions. SeatGeek is the easiest, most efficient way to buy your tickets. Each seat is given a green, red, or yellow dot indicating whether purchasing that ticket would be a good, bad, or fair deal. By using code Phillies Sports Report, you will save $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Again, PHILLYSPORTSREPORT to save $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. Click the link in the description or bio to save. Phils are playing well. All-Star breaks coming up. MLS. I don't know if anyone really wants to watch the Union right now anyway, but the Olympics, if you want to travel to Paris and see the Olympics, you could probably get your tickets on SeatGeek. Comedy shows, concerts, the whole shebang. It's all on SeatGeek. Make sure you go over there. You mentioned Caleb Martin. I want to talk about all the other moves that the Sixers have made so far in free agency. We'll start with the first move in Andre Drummond. 2-year deal for him, 8.4 points per game, 9 rebounds, 55.6 from the field. I wanted Drummond at the deadline last year. Didn't get him, obviously.
You're not alone.
More than happy to have him now.
For sure, yeah. Philadelphia very much wanted Andre Drummond at the trade deadline. They thought they had a deal. It's all set up with the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls pulled out at the last minute, and so now Philadelphia still acquires Drummond, and Chicago acquires nothing. So, you tell me who that worked out for in the long run. But, Drummond is a guy who, when you think about backup centers of, Joel Embiid era past, and he stands out as the top option, clearly. I think that Paul Reed, who now, of course, no longer is with the team after being waived today. I think Paul Reed did a lot of great things for the Philadelphia 76ers. I think that he's going to continue to see success in the league. That being said, just what Drummond brought, and he's an imperfect player, mind you, but as a rebounder and just as a rim protecting threat, I do think that Drummond is a player who Philadelphia is very excited to have back. I think that's pretty obvious. And, really on top of that, you're talking about a guy who, yes, he does have playoff question marks, but we haven't seen him in the playoffs for Philadelphia yet. So assembling the right team around him with Nick Nurse, who I think, at this point has earned a monicum of trust. I think it's going to be interesting to see. Yes, he's not the most versatile defender. Having a guy like a Dembona then as that third option on the depth chart, I think you feel a lot better there because you have that defensive versatility still, similar to a guy like Paul Reed. But, rebounding has been a major issue for Philadelphia. They have not completely addressed it. It'd be nice to have a little bit more rebounding in other positions, such as guys on the wing or, even just some more depth rebounders, whether it's, at the power forward, or we're in kind of a weird positionalist basketball phase, as you can tell by the Sixers starting lineup. So, it's probably not going to be a perfect functioning team in terms of rebounding, but between the added defenders helping Joel to be able to stay low to the basket so we can rebound better, and having Andre Drummond, between those two, it's going to be a much better rebounding situation in Philadelphia, at least on paper. And then on top of that, Andre Drummond is a fantastic locker room presence. I mean, this is a guy who really took an interest in Philadelphia, really was invested in the fans. He was coming out, he was invested in the team down to the Delaware Bluecoats. He was coming out to Bluecoats games to support these young players. So I think he's really just an important guy to have in the locker room, an important guy to have backing up Joel Embiid, because he's, frankly, borderline starter quality, which for a team who is based around a center who's going to miss time, that's pretty much a necessity.
I remember Drummond was big with the Frosty freeze out or whatever they used to have. Is that true? He was big. They brought out the Frosty and he was like, yeah.
Yeah, no, he was always all about all things like Sixer culture. So yeah, he definitely will be completely into it. Whenever Brickin' for Chicken comes up, during the season, and I'll be honest, like I'm looking forward to talking to him post practice and post games, everything like that, just because it's a bit more interesting to do my job, when these guys have great personalities. So Kelly Oubre, who we'll talk about, he's one of the, I would say, easiest to talk to athletes that I've had the opportunity to speak with. So bringing him back was major for the team. We'll touch more on that later. But Andre Drummond, kind of that same guy where, just probably a media favorite, I imagine that he'll be. And as he likely was the last time that he was here.
Yeah, Drummond. The two biggest problems when the Sixers lost to the Knicks in the first round was the non-Embiid minutes and rebounding. And you are getting both of that at kind of a top level with Drummond, which is exactly what they need.
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer of an addition. I understand that there was kind of a mindset of, well, why didn't we get him on the veteran minimum? You kind of have to pay what you pay. And, it is a big difference because, while you're only talking about, I believe roughly $1.5 to $2 million difference, depending on the final figures of Drummond's deal, in terms of this year's salary to Drummond. How it counts against the cap is far more significant than that, and veteran minimum deals can be signed when you're over. So effectively, it was a difference of roughly $5 million in cap space beforehand. And yes, that does make a big difference, but so does Andre Drummond. So at the end of the day, I think it's a move that Philadelphia can live with, and they were clearly able to make solid moves thereafter. So I think that this was a quality signing by the Sixers.
Another signing that the Sixers made right after the Drummond signing was Eric Gordon to a 1-year minimum deal, 11 points per game, 44.3 field. Adds a little bit of depth with Eric Gordon.
Yeah, Eric Gordon, Daryl Morey's got to get one of his guys. And, when you're talking about former Rockets, I think this is probably the best case scenario of former Daryl Morey guys that he could bring in today. Gordon is a bit undersized, so that does play a factor. He is up there in age, so again, that's another factor there. However, he is not only a willing but an able shooter, and he shoots from a pretty solid distance as well. He's not a guy who needs to be right up on the line. He's got a quick trigger. He shoots from deep. And on top of that, he has a lot of functional strength. He's a tough guy. So, even though he's limited defensively and limited due to his size, he's a guy who, at least on his man, he's going to frustrate a little bit. So it's I think it's another quality signing. And when we're talking about a guy for a veteran minimum, I think that's a very solid deal for Philadelphia. A guy who can at times be exposed, but at other times is going to really open up the floor for Philadelphia.
It's not a Daryl Morey offseason without a former Houston Rocket. At least some things
Exactly.
are not changing with the Sixers. You mentioned him earlier, Kelly Oubre, 2 years, $16.3 million deal. This one was also announced at 2 o'clock in the morning or something crazy. 15.4 points per game, 44.1 from the field. Oubre was a big surprise last season with what he did with the Sixers, and bringing him back is a win in my book.
Yeah, I would say for sure. I don't think anyone expected Oubre to initially sign for the veteran minimum like he did last year. And then from thereafter, he vastly outperformed that contract of his. So Philadelphia was very excited to have him. He was one of the I mean, he was not just a fan favorite, but he was a favorite in the locker room. As I mentioned earlier, just his personality is it's not only warm and welcoming, but it's energizing. He's a guy he's a very hard worker, and he kind of rubs that off on other guys. Kind of makes them hard workers as well. So on top of that, one of the greatest traits that Kelly Oubre had last year is he was just willing to do whatever the Sixers needed. He operated as the team's primary defender for much of the season. At least outside of Joel Embiid. And he fluctuated between a starting and a bench role. He did whatever the Sixers needed to do. He has significant flaws. His creation ability is not where it would ideally be for a starter. His shooting ability is rather inconsistent. However, at times, when Oubre was not overtaxed, we were able to see a much better shooting effort from him. So this season, now that Paul George is in town, hopefully Tyrese Maxey stays healthy, Joel Embiid stays healthy, so on and so forth. Even with Eric Gordon on the court, I think that we're probably going to be seeing Oubre, again, injuries permitting, in much closer to that type of role where he doesn't have to do too much and he's able to kind of, rely on what he does well, which is shoot off the catch, defend at a high level, and just give a lot of energy. So, yeah, I think it was a great deal for not only Philadelphia, but I also think it's a great deal for Oubre. It's less than I think he would have gotten elsewhere. But the true benefit here is that after this year, he will have, or rather Philadelphia will have his early bird rights. So they will be able to extend him on up to a 4-year deal. And it's technically re-signing, not an extension. So just to correct the verbiage there. So they will be able to re-sign him to an additional 4 years at 175% what he was making this year. So, barring some transcendent performance, where he is not only averaging like 20 points per game like he did in Charlotte, but on high efficiency, which I don't think is likely to be the case, he's going to want to take that, 4 extra years at 175 plus what he's making this year, to my imagination. So it's a great opportunity to set him up for long-term consistency in Philadelphia, a higher paycheck come next year, because that second year of that 2 years, 16.3, again, is that player option, making it kind of like a 1+1. So he's able to get that longer-term money. Philadelphia gets that, type of cohesion, that consistency on the roster that Joel Embiid talked about in his end-of-season press conference. And I think it's just a good fit. I think the marriage between Philadelphia and Kelly Oubre has gone relatively well so far. And I think this is kind of just the start of things. So I think it was another quality addition for Philly.
Where do you see Oubre in the rotation this year? Do you see him kind of late off the bench, or do you see him having, once again, a prominent role in the bench position or even in the starting lineup?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the expectation should be for Oubre to start. When the news came out that Oubre had re-signed with the Sixers, I believe it was Adrian Wojnarowski. Of course, it may have been Shams Charania. So apologies. It was noted, it was very clear that the expectation, at least from Oubre's side, was that he would be the starting shooting guard for the Philadelphia 76ers. And so now that you have these additional players added, Paul George and Caleb Martin seems to be the fifth starter that you can pencil in there. I think the expectation is for Oubre to loosely start at shooting guard, although it's more so going to be Maxey and Embiid as bookends, and then Oubre, George, and Martin kind of operating effectively as wings in between.
And you mentioned Caleb Martin. That news broke Saturday morning. Woke up, saw the tweet from Woj. Was like, "Oh, look at this, Caleb Martin." 4-year contract with over 32 million guaranteed. And report just came out that Martin reportedly turned down a 5-year, $65 million offer from the Miami Heat a week ago, and is now signed with the Sixers for 4 years at $32 million. You can look at Paul George again for maybe a reason he wants to come to Philadelphia for a heck of a lot less money and less years. Or Miami's just too hot for him. Maybe
maybe we found that player who prefers the Philadelphia climate instead of Miami. Maybe we found that first time individual. But when you look at this deal, Caleb Martin, who, I mean, I'm not reporting anything, but just considering how things went, he may want to take a second look at his representation. He clearly had an idea of what he felt he was worth on the market, and it was more than what Miami was offering at that time. So the problem that he found is that after he declined that, expecting to get more, is that the offers were not coming in as he expected, kind of similar to Kelly Oubre last season. And at that point, Miami was no longer able to offer that exact compensation anymore. And they're a team that's operating relatively close to the second apron anyway. So it was initially tough for them to make that move, especially after they brought back Kevin Love and after they brought in Alec Burks, who, even though it was on the minimum, that's still a decent amount. When we talk about working close against these first and second aprons, every little bit counts. So bringing in those additions, really the Alec Burks signing, I think, was the true signal that Caleb Martin was not returning to Miami. And I was kind of just theorizing on Twitter last night because this has been kind of a little bit of a process that Caleb Martin's been rumored to Philadelphia, and just kind of looking at the other contenders, other teams with cap space, things such as that. Utah never really made sense as a fit for him. Detroit never made sense as a fit for him. Even other teams such as the Cleveland Cavaliers, who still had their mid-level exception, were operating very close to the first apron, thus making it very difficult for them to be able to both use that mid-level exception and also not exceed that first apron. So taking all those, confusing cap situations into account, really the only two teams that kind of made sense for Martin were the San Antonio Spurs and the Philadelphia 76ers. And you have a real opportunity to contend in a featured role in Philadelphia. That's something that San Antonio just couldn't offer. So, in that sense, Philadelphia kind of always made sense as the landing spot for Martin once he declined that deal with Miami. I think that if the deals were equal at this point in the offseason, he probably would have returned to the Heat, but they simply just couldn't compete with the Sixers offer as of July 6th, I should say.
All right, we're gonna blow everything you just said out of proportion and make that some breaking news. It was always Philadelphia. Besides all the money, Martin's a great player. 10 points per game, 4.4 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 43% from the field, 34.9% from three. They're getting a playoff-tested veteran. They're getting a three-point guy. It's one of my favorite signings so far in the postseason.
Yeah, I was typing all this up right before I hopped on today because, of course, that news broke, right around 10-ish, 10:15. So, trying to get all that information, right on Philly Sports Network, just in time there. And I wrote about, the kind of enigma that is Caleb Martin, right? So we're so used to seeing players, and I don't just mean in Philadelphia. Of course, it's not. Philadelphia certainly has seen its fair share of these players who they perform very well in the regular season, and then come the postseason, they're just not the same player, and especially they fail to take their game to the next level. So we don't need to name names. I think we can all think of people who've played for the Sixers who fit in that quality, especially in recent years. But Caleb Martin, interestingly enough, is like the opposite of that type of player. He's a fine player in the regular season. He's a guy who's probably his most useful trait is his defense during the regular season, kind of a quality off-ball defender. But in the postseason, that's where his offense really just takes it up a notch. And, he's seen time 2 years ago for Miami in the playoffs, where he really elevated his game significantly. And even last year was another quality rising of his game. The biggest correlation is that of his shooting, just becoming an absolute knockdown shooter from three in the postseason. He shot 44% from three last year on 5 attempts per game, which is not a small amount for a role player. And then over the past 2 postseasons together, he's averaged 42.6% from three, again, on almost 5 attempts per game. So if he's able to keep that up, that's one, we talked about what kind of, ruined things for Philadelphia in terms of the postseason this year. And that was, of course, Joel Embiid's injury, but also the lack of rebounding, as you mentioned. It certainly would have helped if role players could have hit shots with the consistency that they did during the regular season. We saw Nico Batum, who was amazing during the play-in game, just not as consistent as we would like to see, during the actual Knicks series. Anthony Melton wasn't available, so there's a 3-point threat gone. And then Buddy Hield was virtually unplayable except for game 6 when it was too late. So, it would be nice to have a guy who could consistently contribute from three during the postseason. And Martin's really shaping up to be that guy, but in a two-way form. So a guy who can realistically be one of the top defenders on your team and also just on fire from three. So I think that's the ideal situation, that he comes in and just does what he's done over the past couple of years in the postseason. But as much as this signing will benefit the Sixers during the regular season, this is definitely a move that they made with the playoffs in mind.
Yeah, and I was just going to touch on that. Is this team is starting to look like they are building for the postseason. And of course, the regular season, there's 82 games, but when 50+% of the league makes the postseason, how much does the regular season really matter when you start to build a team that is going to be competitive? And this is a postseason signing. And you see it kind of with the Phillies. We're going back to another Phillies analogy, how they are built for October. This Sixers team is starting to be built for April, May, and June, in my feeling.
Yeah, I think that is. I think it's obviously not unintentional. You look at it, the addition of Paul George, and that's based on talent, if nothing else, obviously. But thereafter, you need that third scoring option in the postseason. Philadelphia has shown that. You need a guy who is able to unleash a barrage of threes again in the postseason. It's another thing that you've seen from Paul George. And then you talk about some of these additional factors. Kelly Oubre was, if you're gonna just look at the box score, you're not gonna understand this point. But I'm not a watch the tape kind of guy, though you have to watch the tape. But if you saw how Kelly Oubre did manage to frustrate Jalen Brunson at times in that postseason series, you understand the importance of having a guy like Oubre. But now you follow that up with, not only do you have Oubre, hopefully Joel Embiid's healthy, but you add 2 more legitimate wing defenders. Philadelphia's in a much better position come the playoffs, because that defense really is integral when you're talking about a postseason push. And on top of that, of course, shooting is also very important come the postseason. So to have 2 guys, who can shoot in the postseason, who can defend at a plus to high level, in addition to Oubre and Joel Embiid, this team, I think, is still a couple moves away. You're going to see moves between now and the beginning of the playoffs. This is not the final roster, and it won't be until after the trade deadline of the buyout market. But from where we're at right now, this is a team that's already ready to potentially produce in the playoffs. I mean, even the Eric Gordon signing, you're adding not only quality shooting presence, but you're adding a lot of veteran experience in that. Andre Drummond, again, a very experienced veteran, solves the rebounding problem, which was an issue in the playoffs. So it seems overly simplistic to say, but not enough teams do this. Philadelphia eyeballed their weaknesses, looked at themselves honestly in the mirror, and acted accordingly, filling roles that needed to be filled after they were not during the playoffs this past year.
That's That's something you would like to hear as a Sixers fan. Some players that the Sixers are losing. They're not keeping everybody, obviously. Nico Batum, Tobias Harris, Buddy Hield, and B-Ball Paul. A few names in there. People were very pleased to see exit Philadelphia, and that is Tobias Harris. Nico Batum, I would have liked to keep Batum fourth quarter. Why Batum in? Would have liked to see him. I liked what he added. Buddy Hield. I mean, I didn't expect him to stay, but it is what it is. And then B-Ball Paul kind of came out this morning. Sixers waived him. What do you dissect from the players that were left? How are they going to fill in? And how will they succeed in their other roles? Batum, Harris, Hield, Reed, and who else could go?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think they're going to miss several of these players. Obviously, the concept of Buddy Hield, I think that they will miss. The fit didn't work, but I think most of that's just due to the lack of availability he had alongside Joel Embiid. And Daryl Morey's addressed that himself, including at his postseason press conference. The guy I think that they're effectively going to miss the most is probably Nico Batum, someone who they really wanted to bring back. Joel Embiid emphasized pretty clearly he wanted them to bring him back. Unfortunately, it really just wasn't in Philadelphia's control. Batum has family out in LA. He's, of course, spent time as a Clipper before. And it was just in the best interest of him and his family to go back out west. It kind of is what it is, but it's certainly damaging to Philadelphia. The addition of Caleb Martin, though, certainly lessens that sting by quite a bit. So there's certain things that Martin can't do that Batum did. But at the same time, you're getting a younger, stronger, albeit shorter and not as long, guy in Caleb Martin who can replicate at least certain things that Nico Batum did, including playing quality defense and stretching the floor a bit. But outside of that, one guy who I think that they will miss, but they also missed him last year was DeAnthony Melton. Ideally, I think they would have liked to have brought back Melton. They could not compete with Golden State in terms of price point. Golden State offered him the full mid-level exception, which is fantastic for Melton to be able to get that kind of money guaranteed for 1 year. The back, I would say at this point, I still have legitimate concerns over. He spoke to us after the season, and he seems to be positive in terms of the prognosis. He's stated that he does not need surgery on the back. I still have my questions. It clearly bothered him and clearly flamed up, and I hope and wish him the best that he plays 82 plus games with Golden State next year between the regular season and the playoffs. That being said, between not being able to offer that amount and the questions around the back, it didn't work out for Philadelphia. However, I just think looking at the player archetype, you get a guard who really does the dirty work, gets in there defensively, can rebound, can stretch the floor. That's a guy who you're going to miss. There's not really straight up replicating that, but effectively replacing your backup two guard with Eric Gordon, I think there's a lot of value in, especially when you kind of factor in his ability as a shooter. Mm-hmm. Losing Paul Reed kind of stings on a personal level. Just another really cool guy. Someone who I think was well liked in the locker room. Someone who really did his job, did it well, and is just an extremely hard worker. Again, that being said, I think you have to consider it an upgrade to Andre Drummond. So long term, maybe you have, some type of concern, when you're looking at that third year after Drummond's 2 years on this deal. I think that's too far out to be concerned over. And really, the first domino was when the team drafted Adem Bona with the 41st pick in the draft. Once that move was made, and just for the record, I'm relatively high on Adem Bona. Once that move was made, that was really the first precursor into Paul Reed may not be on this team come the start of the regular season. So there's players who they're definitely going to miss. We'll see what happens to guys like Cam Payne and Kyle Lowry. Lowry apparently has interest from the Phoenix Suns despite their addition of Monte Morris. They're going to need to add a veteran guard somewhere, but between Payne, between Lowry, and some of the other options possibly out there, I think that they're going to solve that problem. So it's not a lingering concern. I think all things considered, Philadelphia has made out really well this offseason.
Yeah, and someone else that made up really well this offseason is I see his jersey in your background. I'm wearing his jersey right now, and that's Tyrese Maxey. 5-year, $204 million max extension. So well deserved from Maxey. Fell to 21 in the 2020 draft. Was it 21 or 20? I think it was 20, right?
It was 20. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, man, has he been fun to watch. And just most improved player, and now he's getting paid.
Yeah, no, he really is, and I really can't say more on this, but I spoke. We've talked about it, and it's he's very excited, and he it's really shows a lot of trust between him and the organization that he was able to and willing, more importantly, to sign this deal the way that he did that allowed them to bring in all these other free agents. Daryl Morey's offseason plan does not work if Tyrese Maxey does not play ball. Now, granted, Philadelphia could have matched any offer that he could have gotten anywhere else. But if he signed an offer sheet with the team that forces Philadelphia to act sooner, which throws off the timing of this deal completely. So, full points to Tyrese Maxey for approaching this the way that he did. And, I think there's few players in the NBA who, deserve a max contract. At least compared to other players, because you can easily point to, Franz Wagner is a guy who, he just signed for a max deal, and people are already talking about, well, is he truly worth it? Worth it is tough, right? Because there's a sense of all players in the NBA are overpaid, all players in the NBA are underpaid relative to how much team owners and everyone like that makes. The point I'm essentially trying to drive at is Tyrese Maxey is going to look underpaid on this deal, considering his level of play and the other players around him. Because so many players get max contract deals, Tyrese Maxey is quickly going to look like a steal of a deal, because he's going to be compared to guys like Franz Wagner, who is a very good player, and other players who are receiving these maximums who are just not performing at the level of Tyrese Maxey.
Something else that is a steal of a deal, into another fantastic ad transition by me, is the deal you can save with FOCO. Gear up for the Sixers, the Phils, the Eagles, the Flyers, whoever. Any major sports team with FOCO. Real fans need the best gear, and that's why FOCO makes the most legendary gear for the most legendary fans. Click on the link in the description or bio to save 10% off any FOCO purchase. Zach, you've come off to me as a guy who would absolutely rock the overalls.
You know what? I don't think my wife would ever let me find out, but I definitely would. I've seen those Philly overalls on the on FOCO, and I'll be honest, I've eyeballed them quite a little bit.
They're nice. There are a lot of people got the short overalls in the stadium this year, and you can save 10% off with the link in the bio or the description. This offseason ain't over for the Sixers. We are only a week in, and there is still more to be done. What more will the Sixers do up until October when the season gets underway?
Yeah, from here, for the most part, it's probably filling out with veteran minimum deals. There's still a few roster spots. Take a look at. The one big question mark is if either Philadelphia is going to do regarding KJ Martin. So several people at now have reported and theorized into this. John Hollinger was the first. John Hollinger of The Athletic. Brian Toporek of Forbes and Liberty Ballers also spoke on this. And then I believe Michael Scotto of Hoops Rumors might have also mentioned this, or Hoops Hype, rather, I should say. But there is the possibility to extend, thanks to his very low cap hold, extend or rather re-sign KJ Martin on effectively a balloon deal that could then be traded during the season. It could be used in a sign-and trade. The financials of that are a bit murky. They'd only be able to use. There's a lot of complications with the CBA, And if anyone can DM me if they want, those questions answered, that's probably a lot just to kind of run into right now. But effectively put, it's more effective to sign KJ Martin to a balloon deal now, potentially move him during the season. I would say that's the only other kind of flashy move other than signing guys to veteran minimums. But even still, Philadelphia is a team that is well positioned this offseason. And while we're kind of coming to a close of the exciting offseason moves, it's going to be quite a trade season during mid-year and buyout market season for the Philadelphia 76ers this year, because again, with the restraints in place with the CBA and who can sign buyout free agents and who can't, as long as Philadelphia maintains that flexibility, which I imagine they will be among the top, if not the top destinations for not only guys who are trying to move to contenders in the trade market, but for those buyout candidates come this midseason. So it's an exciting position to be in for Philadelphia.
Yeah, and looking throughout the NBA, all 30 teams, or however many there are, who has had the best offseason? Like, give me the top 3 of throughout the NBA. The Sixers all in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think Philadelphia has a very solid claim near the top. Top 3. I mean, there's actually a lot of teams who I've liked what they've done. I think the New York Knicks, you relatively have to like what they've done. The Oklahoma City Thunder is another great team. I think the Dallas Mavericks have made significant additions. And say what you want about Klay Thompson, I'm not expecting Splash Brother Klay to show up to Dallas, but just to get that level of a shooter alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving is immense. On top of bringing in Najee Marshall, just wonderful additions for the Dallas Mavericks. And then the Golden State Warriors, I actually think, have kind of been a bit underrated, especially if they can pull off this move for Lauri Markkanen. But being able to bring in Buddy Hield to replace Klay, if the DeAnthony Melton move works itself out, a lot of their youth should be built up. They are keeping a lot of that chemistry consistent. Depending on who you talk to, the chemistry may be improved without Klay. Honestly, like it's a very underrated, I feel, offseason in Golden State that I think is not far from done. But there's frankly a lot of teams. I think there's a lot of stark difference. There's teams who clearly did not do well this offseason, and there's a lot of teams that clearly did well. But if I'm saying my top 3, it's got to be Philadelphia. I think with the moves that they've made, I would pencil in Oklahoma City with the addition of Hartenstein and the underrated moves of re-signing Aaron Wiggins, not Andrew, Aaron Wiggins, and Isaiah Joe to the deals that they did that are significantly more tradable. Oklahoma City also had a stellar offseason. And then, of course, the Dallas Mavericks. It's just 3 teams that have had great off seasons, and 2 of those teams are going to be competing for the top seed in the West. One of those teams is going to be competing for the top seed in the East. So, you make great moves in the offseason and you significantly increase your chance at competing. And that's what those 3 squads have done.
Isaiah Joe, a Sixer, great. The biggest thing for me with this all, I look at the LeBron James contract. 2 years, $104 million for 2 years. That to me is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, when you're LeBron James, you can kind of do as you will, especially since his level of play, is I think it's a good bit lower than his prime. He's still one of the better players in the NBA. Is the crazy part. I mean, he was all NBA, I believe, 3rd team last year. When he is locked in and focused, which he typically saves for the playoffs, he's a heck of a player. The biggest problem in LA is just fielding the team around him. I mean, they have Anthony Davis, but there are major question marks thereafter. If they're able to keep Austin Reeves, I think that's a good fitting deal. Really, what they ideally would look to do is moving off of D'Angelo Russell and Jared Vanderbilt in a single deal along with draft compensation for just a far better fit at guard. And whether you add maybe Rui Hachimura for salary and you send that to Atlanta for Trae Young, they're one of the teams. A lot of teams are a little afraid to acquire Trae Young right now, or at least to offer much. LA should be a team that's all in on that type of move, simply because they don't really have another option. They have to compete now, and at this point, they're just simply not good enough to do it. So, LeBron continues to sign for these high-value contracts. He lives in LA. They drafted his son. He's living his best life, but the Lakers are unfortunately not ready to compete for a title at this point.
Where do you see Bronny season?
I do not mean this as an insult. I see him in the G League. I see him spending a lot of time learning and developing, and I think that there is a pathway to Bronny becoming a consistent role player in the NBA if all goes right. And that's, I think, asking a fair bit. That being said, there are certain DeAnthony Melton-esque qualities that he possesses that I think could grow and, could cultivate a legitimate role player in Bronny, but he's going to need to spend a lot of time at the G League. I don't know that going to the team that his dad plays for was really the best thing for him, nor do I think going to a sizable market like LA was the best thing for his development. But we will see. He is an incredibly hardworking kid. I know a lot of people are ready to say everything he has is due to his father. A fair bit of it is, but it should not convince people that he's also not a hard worker, which he in fact is. So if he works hard enough, continues to develop as he has, I think that he can find a role in a matter of years in the NBA. He's going to be spending a lot of time in the G League, though.
All right. Final thing before we wrap it up. If the offseason ended today, this is where the Sixers are. This is their team that they have on paper right now. Where do they compete? In the East with Boston and New York. And is this a team that can get past the second round? Like we all want them to.
Yeah, I think this team certainly could get past the second round. And I'm not, just trying to sell you positivity. There are legitimate hurdles that they're going to have to go over. But when you look at the Sixers compared to some of these other teams in the Eastern Conference, Boston is incredibly talented. They were rather untested throughout much of the postseason. And even the Dallas Mavericks, it was a good matchup for Boston, which is to their credit, is not a slight at them. All that being said, I don't know that Philadelphia is as good of a matchup for Boston, specifically with Joel Embiid. The Celtics, they no longer have Robert Williams. Al Horford is yet another year older. We'll see what I don't want to call it his competitive drive, because outside of that year in Philadelphia, I think he's consistently been a top tier competitor. But I wonder if the general hunger for the entire team is going to be there. Al Horford, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, they've all won their first ring. Is that going to affect how hungry they are to win a second? And then a guy like Drew Holiday, who I'm very high on and was a star for them in the postseason. Again, just another year older. We'll see, if it really holds up. But Philadelphia has already begun to kind of unlock the Boston Celtics a little bit. So now with the addition of Paul George, a much better fitting roster around Joel Embiid, I think that they have a shot. I'm not ready to give them the title, but I think they have a shot to get past Boston. And as far as the Knicks are concerned, I think that's a very tough matchup for the Sixers. But even still, when you look at the best players on both teams, Philadelphia has 3 out of the 4 best players. And I think you have to kind of give an edge to Philadelphia in that capacity, especially considering that Philadelphia is assembling somehow some semblance of depth, right? So with that being considered, with the Knicks being very light, at the 5, really just having Mitchell Robinson and Jericho Sims right now. Julius Randle can play a little bit of small ball 5, but that's pretty small. I think that the matchup kind of works well for Philadelphia, but New York still has a decent amount of maneuverability, especially if they're looking to move off of Julius Randle, which is not reporting, we will see, but it would give them a lot more flexibility if they were to move off of Randall for, maybe that Karl Anthony Towns trade eventually actually happens. Something such as that, bringing in a star center, somebody who at least on one end can compete with Joel Embiid. So for now, I think the Sixers have probably close to as good a shot as any team in the East. I give the edge to Boston just because they won it last year. But things are shaping up pretty well for Philadelphia.
Well, that's a good way to close out this week's Philly Sports Hour. Zach, thank you very much for coming on. Where can people find you on social media and the interwebs?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. It was a blast. You can find my work on phillysportsnetwork.com. You can find it on metrophiladelphia.com. You can find it in the paper at Metro Philly. Just at Chavo NBA, any questions, DM me, anything you're looking for there, but that's where you can find my work. And just thanks again, Benjamin, for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you for everybody for watching and listening. If you ever miss a live Philly Sports Hour, you can listen on anywhere you find your podcast. Follow on all social medias. Thank you, Tiki Fuka, for sponsoring. We will see you next week. Go Sixers. Thank you for watching.
Swing and a drive, left field. It's deep. It's gone. Yes! And it is gone. Yes! It is bedlam at the bank. Look at the doctor. Yes, he's got it. Here he comes. Way rock the baby to sleep and slammed up. And the doctor made a sensational play. Hunter in front, the front, and they score! And Giroux got it.